What a treat we have for you today, you miserable accursed. If you want politics, we have politics. If you like people who curse about politics, have we got a show for you today. No need for detailed introductions. With me is Scott Reid, the Prince Edward County dandy, and the man who took me to see Elton John last week. Thank you, Scott. That was fucking amazing. And Kory Teneycke, who's simply the best person we could have to help us unpack the Conservative leadership. Welcome, team. Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Hello.
Hello. We're doing this at 8:30 in the evening. And as a consequence, Kory has a rye and Coke in his hand. I have a rum and Coke in my hand. And Scott Reid has a Michelob Ultra.
I have a diet beer in my hand.
Such a liberal.
Man.
Jesus, Murphy, I've become a pale imitation of myself.
When are you going to just go to white wine and admit it?
That's right.
White wine spritzer.
Just a spritzer's nice.
Yeah.
Fine. It's got a little paste in it. I like that. I don't know what to tell you. I can't even live with myself. David, how many times when we went the other night, we figured out that you and I have been to see Elton John together 4 times. So, how many times have you been to see Elton overall?
I don't know. Do you include Joel?
I do.
Do you include the shows with Joel?
I will. But as you know, I'm out on Billy Joel. I don't like.
Right. Me too. But I went to a couple of those dual shows, so I would say 36.
Wow.
36.
Yeah.
All right. That's a lot.
Starting in 1982.
Well
Phil Boychuk and I flew down from Regina to Maple Leaf Gardens to see Elton in Toronto and then in the Forum in Montreal. Back-to-back shows. That's how it started.
Which one was he better at?
Well, first of all, people asked me how the show was the other night, and I would say these things about it. I would say that I loved it. I would say that it was great fun. I would say it was very moving at times, and I would say it's easily the worst show I've ever seen him do. And I'm really happy that he's stopping.
Right.
Right.
You got to know when to quit.
Old Elton is nowhere near as old Willie, though, because we went to see Willie Nelson 3-4 years back, and old Willie is old.
I think Willie's a bit older, though, eh?
Yeah, a bit. Yeah,
a bit older.
Yeah. Now that the Queen's gone, it's just him.
So this thing happened on the weekend. This Conservative leadership selection process, and I don't know if anybody heard or not, but this young whippersnapper Poilievre got a lot of votes. And
what a shock!
What a shock! Well, I'll tell you where I was watching it. Nobody thought he was going to get 70% of the vote or close to it. The Laurentian elite gave up their Jean Charest dreams hard. And so even on Saturday night, some of the people I was with were wondering if there was potential. Anyway, there wasn't. Our friend Jenny Byrne had orchestrated a campaign that just laid a goddamn beating on everybody else that was involved. Now, Kory, you were there. What was it like?
First of all, just on the number, I went on air on CBC that night and thought it would be 70 or higher. So I fell a little short. It was basically 70 unadjusted and slightly lower adjusted, but I wasn't surprised. But if you're wondering why the media and election elite folks were surprised, despite the fact that Charest lost 330 out of 338 ridings, the 2 that he won outside of Quebec were Ottawa Centre and University Rosedale. So where the smarty pants
he swept the Royal Ottawa Golf Club. Charest swept the Royal Ottawa Golf Club.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but the concentration of votes that he got in like other ridings where he did better than average are places like St. Paul's and stuff like places like that. So, elite opinion obviously is where Charest did well. And so it's not a huge shock that the chattering class of Ottawa who live in Ottawa Centre, the folks in the Glebe and the folks in Westboro, got it wrong. That's not a super shocking revelation for commentary on Conservative Party politics. These are folks that mostly talk to each other. It's a big echo chamber, and they don't spend a lot of time traveling outside of those circles. when they're if they venture as far afield as say Vancouver, the Globe and Mail is still distributed there for Torontonians living in the colonies. But like they don't really expose themselves to other opinions or other people. So I'm not shocked that they got it wrong.
I was an observer at the 1983 Progressive Conservative Leadership Convention. John Crosby threw a lobster dinner for everybody. That happened this weekend?
Well, it was a little unusual in terms of mood and tone because of the death of the Queen. I think the convention folks had a difficult job trying to find the right balance in terms of being respectful and somber and marking that moment, and then also trying to hype up a crowd for a leadership convention. So they canceled the confetti cannons. They kind of oddly played funeral music during the proceedings.
It was too much. It was odd. It was odd.
And then the strangest thing in all of the staging of this was they did a violin and saxophone rendition of "God Save the King" that included a saxophone solo at the end, which I thought, as a jazz lover, was a nice touch. But it was a little odd in a bunch of ways. But anyway, all of that aside, the thing culminated in what everyone was waiting for. The result was not a surprise, but was to see, all right, so what is the new leader going to do? Is Pierre going to tack or not tack? And I think not surprisingly, there's no tack. He's on the same message track that he was all campaign. I thought it was a good speech. I think there's a lot that we can unpack in it in terms of the direction that he's planning on going. But I think the guy's a message machine, and he has a message, and he is going to drive that message from now until the next federal election.
Scott, what do you think of his speech?
I thought it was very effective. I thought two things about it jumped out at me. First of all, actually, I want to just start by also echoing, like, it was a thumping, eh? Like, it was a thumping. Like, the number of memberships sold, the number of votes tallied, 330 out of 338 ridings, right? Like, our friend Jenny, and I think this is all in service of something that I desperately oppose, but our friend Jenny captained this ship unerringly. Like, it was a beating. Okay. Just a complete beating. So I just kudos to Jenny, because if anyone questions her skill, they're running in the noonday sun. They are mad because she just crushed.
Well, just to build on that, though, to interrupt and build on that, everyone knew Pierre was going to win. To get that percentage of your vote out in a race where it's a foregone conclusion is a organizational accomplishment, a GOTV accomplishment that I have never seen before in a leadership selection process in a Conservative Party in Canada. And so, that the skill and the effort and the work of all the volunteers and the campaign team, and certainly captained and driven by our friend Jenny, was really a feat to behold.
I think we can all agree it's the second best leadership campaign ever run.
Well, she didn't get 98%, or what was it, 98, 92, something like that?
93.
93.
Who's counting? Who's keeping track?
Who's counting? 93.4? Who's counting?
Well, and Trudeau crushed with 80% of the points and 79% of the votes too in his, right? So, and I think there's going to be a clash going forward. Of his speech, I thought three things about his speech. Overall, I'm not part of the, apocryphal elite who didn't get the message, and I'm not sure that we don't exaggerate that. I think that people thought he was going to win, but I thought he was going to win. I thought he was going to crush, and I thought he was going to hammer away on the economy, and that's what he did. So I thought three things about his speech. One is it was 80% economic, bread and butter economics, and I think that that's wise. I think it's smart for him to move, a lot less vaccine mandate, a lot less convoy, a lot more. Are you angry? I'm angry too. I'm angry about inflation. Move the anger. Like, he's not pivoting. He's not compromising. He's not turning. He's shifting from that anger to anger about bread and butter economics, and I think there's a lot more votes in that barrel. I thought two other things though about it. One was I thought that the introduction of his personal story, which we're just beginning to get hints of, is something that people should take note of. There's not a lot.
Well, the prominence of his wife just leapt off the
absolutely
screen, right?
Because his story was also her story. That's the way that it was packaged. They were sort of packaged together. But I do think, in particular, his personal story, the line specifically where he said, my biological mother is here along with my parents, and they were school teachers, and it's kind of complicated. Like, he sort of threw it a Modern Family line. I thought that's a shade and dimension of this guy that we don't know, we've not heard before. And it's a little bit in contradiction to what his most vociferous opponents would want to say and imagine about him. And I think there's going to be more of that. And I think people who oppose him have got to respect that. Like, there's work there for him to be able to connect with people on a personal level. Right now, he doesn't really connect on a personal level other than, are you mad? I'm fucking mad too. Let's all fucking be mad together, okay? Let's get, 70%.
Well, that's not about
mad.
getting mad, though, right? Like I'm not sure if you noted the part of the family story. Like, he's, there's something there for everyone. His adopted, adopted father is now married to a man. There's no way of trapping him in the traditional, you're a homophobic bigot, etc.
That's my point. That's my point, is that so far he's given people very little to connect to on a personal level. It's just been, let's talk about your anger, my anger, and channel it all together. But that first thing about the personal story is in contradiction to some of that. And it gives him an ability to connect with people on a human and visceral and personal level. And that's something you have to respect of your opponent. The second thing that was really, the other thing that was really important about it is that he was able to articulate a vision of smaller government that seems like it's in service to working Canadians, as opposed to smaller government that removes the things to protect working Canadians. And again, like that, I think, the government's going to have to figure out, Trudeau's going to have to figure out how he responds to that, because just scolding him isn't going to do it. And there's a...
Well, no, but I at the risk of being labeled with the hidden agenda thing, I mean, Scott, you do have to attack those things. You have to extend them to their logical conclusion. What is it? What else does it mean? Other than just that?
There's some basic government competency things that need to be addressed if you want to go down that road. If you're Trudeau, like how is it that you can make the case that government is a solution, not less government, in fixing some of these problems when you can't issue a fucking passport on time, right? Like, core government competency on simple things that no one can understand why you can't do it. Doesn't increase the confidence of people that you're going to, fix complicated things like the healthcare system. So, I think there's a competency gap that has to be closed if you want to sell a larger government is the solution message as a progressive. And it's hard to do the one if you don't do the other. And so, I think there's some nuts and bolts things that the government has to get right. If they want to have any credibility in selling that message in the near term. In time, they'll fix those things. But right now, they're looming large, and they're going to have to watch that stuff.
All right, guys, let's bring some structure to this thing. What you were going to say, Scott? Go ahead. Just before I bring some structure to it.
I wasn't headed toward, I would make the argument for bigger government. I don't think that's the play for the government. I think the challenge for the government is to say, is to find their own path to say, actually, we're laying claim to the working Canadian vote. And that's a challenge, because he made an articulation there for working class votes that I thought was clever. And the government's going to have to figure out how they bullseye those voters, because if they don't compete for them, they'll not win the next election. It's that simple.
Right. Hurley Burleyites, we've all heard about how unpleasant airports and air travel have been these last few months. Well, I have an announcement. Only I can fix it. Sort of. Via our presenting sponsor, TELUS, I'm taking you on a stress-free trip to Germany, France, the UK, and Sweden from the comfort of your own car seat, couch, and listening device. It's part of our tour of international best practices, countries who are using evidence to create effective policy around how they manage their spectrum. That's the stuff that makes wireless connectivity work. We're picking up on the rural connectivity conversation we started last week. Here's the key question. How do we best incentivize carriers to build in our rural and remote communities? Let me give you a little background. Spectrum licenses are 20 years long in Canada, but many carriers who own the licenses aren't using them to build anything at all. They're just sitting on them, looking to resell the spectrum for enormous profit. They win. Our rural communities lose because they still don't have high-speed wireless. There are lots of ways to defeat this naked profiteering. In TELUS's view, it starts with government policy based on the use it or lose it principle. In the UK, they employ creative variations of that approach. In the US, they're innovating with a reverse auction idea, which has proven to be an effective tool for funding rural connectivity. France has just granted licenses that require large and explicit numbers of new sites. 25% of them must be located in rural areas, plus ubiquitous coverage on roadways. Germany has imposed shared deployment obligations, which encourages operators to collaborate to ensure coverage. And Sweden has created explicit policy providing coverage to households with no alternative form of internet access. So there's lots of international evidence piling up for what's possible. The models are out there, and TELUS believes government needs to step up to get rural Canadians connected in order to meet their own social policy goals. Next week, we'll wrap up this conversation with a forward-looking announcement on spectrum. Stay tuned. All right, so Kory, I was going to ask you a kind of a simple question, which was, how does Poilievre win the next election? But as I was thinking about that, I thought maybe first I needed to ask you, both of you, what does a win for Poilievre in the next election mean? I.e., are we operating on the assumption that the Conservatives must win a majority to govern, or close to it, maybe with the Bloc, but or are we assuming that the NDP would allow the existence of a Conservative government as they did in 2006?
Well, I think Harper showed quite conclusively, and we've seen it in other provinces, that you can govern with a minority as a Conservative, with everyone talking against you but keeping you afloat for very long periods of time. So if you think of what would happen if there is a Conservative minority government, and say it's a very thin one, I don't think it's going to be, but say it was, you're going to have one, possibly two of the major parties going through leadership races. They're not going to be in a position to prosecute an election campaign. And it's also, incumbent upon parties to allow the party that wins an opportunity to govern. They do have a mandate, even if it's a small mandate. But certainly there will be a mandate for change. And you see that in the right track, wrong direction. You see that in the support levels for the government as a whole. What you have is two parties with basically the same levels of support. Just one has a more efficient vote than the other currently. But you see a government overall that's very unpopular and moving in the wrong direction on those things. So I think they can govern for quite a while. In answer to that, I think it's possible to do it with quite a slim minority. If it's
so, the plurality is all he needs, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's
Scott. I think that's contrary to the exception. I think that's contrary to the expectation of a lot of people.
I think it is too, but I don't think it's a given that he has to win a majority in order to win. I think that there's lots of ways to kind of skirt through things. We don't know what the circumstances of the next election will be. One of the preconditions to the next election is there's going to be some disruption between the Liberals and the NDP. Either this pact will fall apart prematurely, which means that somebody will be withdrawing their support. That's going to create bad blood, or it's run to its end and someone's going to be eating the other. And so, that may make the active dynamic of a Pierre Poilievre minority a little different. So I don't think it's a given. By the way, I'll take another. You didn't pose this question, but I also think that one of the legacies of Saturday night's vote and the overwhelming size of it is, I think he's going to be granted a virtue that the last couple of leaders weren't. Like, I think he can make gains, still fall short of government, and live to fight another day. I think that he can do a 2004, 2006 play a la Harper that O'Toole didn't get an opportunity to do for
obvious reasons, and that why Scheer didn't. When you win with almost 70%, that's a lot different than Scheer did, winning with 50% on the 14th ballot. Like, these are not the same mandate.
Yeah.
So I think he's got a very strong mandate. But one other point I'd like to make, because I think when we look at the dynamic of these parties, I think Poilievre will be mostly taking Liberal seats, but he's mostly and very clearly mostly hunting NDP votes. And I think he will mostly get NDP votes in the same way that in the last provincial election, while we ate a bit of Liberal lunch, we ate a lot more NDP lunch. And you're seeing that same play being set up. You're seeing the same sorts of value proposition being set up, clearly targeting new Canadians, which is one half of the key to winning the GTA. And you're also seeing them targeting traditional NDP supporters who are more blue collar in nature. And you're seeing that as well. The third group that I think is worth talking about, and this is the most explicit play I've seen at the federal level for these voters, but we certainly were very cognizant of it in the provincial election in Ontario and spent a lot of time working on it. And that's going after millennial voters on the issue of housing. And there's a twofer on that, because as you went through on the hurly-burly on talking about the housing market, the two big demographics that are trying to move into the housing market are new Canadians and millennials. And he explicitly talked about those groups in relation to that policy. It's a winner. It's just a complete winner on every level. People are not wanting to hear about it in the way that the Liberal Party and the NDP have traditionally talked about it, which is subsidized housing for people that aren't you. This is the votes in that are not about getting a rental unit in a co-op housing.
No, the political pressure here, Kory, is not about social housing. It's about middle-class affordability of housing.
Exactly. And for two big groups, and if you look at who elected Trudeau initially and who is being a key demographic group for him, it's millennials. In his initial election, largely around the marijuana legalization issue, that was a big motivator to get millennials out. But I think even things like talking about Bitcoin, which I saw Dominic Clauban went out and attacked him on and everything, I think that's a trap for the Liberals to go into, because who is skeptical of banking and current currencies, et cetera, also millennials. Lots of other voters don't care about it. They're not engaged in that. But he is making a very, very clear play for millennial voters on those issues.
On the other hand, though, Kory, he polls poorly for a conservative among people over the age of 65 who are less excited by a revolutionary, less excited by somebody promising radical change. Other than once in a blue moon, people over 65 vote 2-1 for people under 35.
Yeah, I don't think that the vulnerable part of the Conservative coalition are the over 65s, and I think one of the groups that are the most harmed by inflation are the retired who have savings. They're the ones who are getting debased. So I think there's a lot there to work with. I don't think that Pierre is scary. If I had to choose between scary and nerdy, I'm going to say nerdy. It's not. I don't think he looks like somebody who's going to go and light, and burn the parliament to the ground. That's not what he's talking about. The actual things he's talking about are pretty modest but pretty definable policy goals that connect with a lot of voters that you need if you want to win.
Scott, when you look at this from Poilievre's perspective, where do you see the opportunity for him in terms of making gains for the Conservatives?
I think in the same place by and large. I think obviously he wants to do the basics. He wants to catalyze his base, which there's every indication he's going to be able to do. He wants to try to surface a few voters that haven't come out in the past. That may be harder than we think, because I think it's harder for him to talk to those voters in the explicit way he was able to in the early stages of this race in particular, as we get closer to a general election. Like, he just can't be wandering around talking about vaccine mandates. I think that this call about freedom has a lot less juice in it when you get into the general discussion. I don't think the Canadians think that Canada is a place that imprisons them. So I just think that the freedom thing is, it's a meat and potatoes partisan thing. But I think, you get past those basics, it's going to be about, winning the lunch bucket, pocketbook voters. And so if you take a look at what Kory was saying in terms of carving out some of the NDP votes, I think it's really important, because the gig isn't, people might be listening thinking, oh, does that mean he's trying to identify, well, how many NDP seats are there and how many can he steal? I don't think it's about stealing their seats. It's about stealing their votes and shifting what the vote balances are in a whole pile of critical elections, particularly in Ontario, right?
Yep.
So you start shifting some of those votes away from the NDP into the Conservative column. You actually get two victories. One is you get them. The second is the Liberals don't get them, because the Liberals know that they need those votes also. I think the big challenge for him, and it's also a big challenge for Trudeau, obviously, and it's why Trudeau must stay, and I want to come back to that, is Quebec, right? Mm-hmm. And I just think that Quebec's going to be a fascinating, it always matters so much, but Jesus Christ, it's going to matter, right? It's going to matter so much, because the lock that Trudeau should have as a Francophone leader and a Francophone prime minister on Quebec isn't obvious because of the dynamic that's unfolding in Quebec with the CAQ. And the ability of someone like Poilievre to try to make some inroads, is really imponderable, because he's an Anglophone. Yeah, he speaks good French, better French than most conservative leaders. But he's still not. He's still not of the land there.
You got to. Well, okay. But he speaks damn good French, but he got more votes than Scheer and Max Bernier did combined in that leadership race in Quebec.
That's a relative measure, not an objective measure. We're talking general elections.
He was going up against one of the most successful politicians in Quebec history, Jean Charest, and he absolutely kicked his fucking ass.
I know, but that's a relative measure. That's within the tent of the Conservative Party. We know that.
But Kory, that doesn't have anything to do with general election appeal.
Well, but it has. I think it does. I think when you're going up against somebody who has that level of profile in that market, like he is a favored son of the province of Quebec. Like, there is no doubt, there is an element of Quebec.
Pierre Poilievre is a favored son.
No. Jean Charest is going up against a favored son of Quebec. He's going up against Charest, right? Like, it's not like he's going up against.
Charest signed up 8,000 people in Quebec. Charest signed up 8,000 people in Quebec.
What does that tell you about Jean Charest's appeal within the province right now and the relevancy? What's the biggest dynamic?
So he's not the favorite son.
Well, but he has been in the past, and if Quebec viewed him, if Quebec voters viewed him as such an outsider and such a foreign individual, and his French was so terrible or something, because it obviously isn't, you would expect to see a differential in the vote in that province. And I think if you're looking at things that surprise the media, one of the biggest surprises is just how terribly Charest did in Quebec versus Poilievre. Like, right.
I'm going to confront you with a different metric.
One in Alberta in the 2013 Liberal leadership. Like, it's not.
I'm going to confront you with a different metric, because here's a reality of Canadian politics, as far as I'm concerned, and this comes from a guy who's spent his life running Anglophones. Okay, so there is no evidence other than possibly Jack Layton, depending on how you categorize Layton and depending on how you categorize Duceppe. But in any event, there's no history of Quebecers voting for English Canadian leaders when there are Quebec leaders on the ballot. They just don't do it in any numbers, right?
Well, I guess we're going to find out. But I think the assumption that you're making around this is one that I hope the Liberal War Room's making, because I think there is more potential for Pierre Poilievre in Quebec than there has been for any Conservative leader going back to Mulroney in terms of the ability to get votes there.
That may be true. That also may be true.
That may be.
I don't disagree with that. That may be true.
I'm not taking anything for granted. I'm saying that both of the leading contenders for prime minister have a big asterisk next to their ability to pull in votes in the next election in the province of Quebec. And whoever actually erases that asterisk is going to win.
I would combine it with this point as well, that the Liberal Party of Quebec has never been weaker in my lifetime than it is today. Both, if you look at the provincial races going on right now,
that's not true federally. It's
well,
true
but it's not the power force that it once was. And if you look at the provincial politics there and the shift in the ideology and the tone and the debate that's been going on, if you add up, what the CAQ is doing and what the Conservative Party in Quebec are doing, there is clearly a different Quebec there than there was, in the 90s. And there has been a shift in the debate. There has been an erosion of the power base of the Liberal Party, I think, in the province. And I think we've never fielded on the Conservative side a stronger candidate than Poilievre will be, since Mulroney. So I think all of that, there is an opportunity. Do I think he's going to win the majority of seats in Quebec? No, absolutely not. But he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to.
No, he can't win. He can't win very many at all without screwing us. So he has like there are about 60% of the voters in Quebec that are voting for center right or right wing parties between the CAQ and the nascent Conservative Party there. That's a lot of people, and the Conservative Party has like 100,000 members or more, maybe, in it. So yeah, there's a little bit of potential there, a little bit of opening there. But I mean, that's certainly one of the reasons why I come to the conclusion that Trudeau has to stay, is because we need to keep Quebec impregnable.
Well, he's clearly the best choice for the Liberal Party, I think, for the next election, and especially because of Quebec. But I think for more places than that. But, I think there's some things he needs to do if we want to shift to talking about the Liberals a bit. If he wants to get his mojo back, I think he is tone-wise lost the plot. His tone when he was elected was around sunny ways. It was about inclusivity. It was about, a big warm hug for everyone. He has become one of the most divisive figures in modern Canadian politics. His tone has changed to the point where it's unrecognizable. And I don't know, not everyone came out of COVID all right. And I would put Justin Trudeau near the top of the list. The vitriolic demonizing of the unvaccinated, the hurling of bombs at Western Canada for no particular purpose, the lack of empathy for people suffering in certain regions of the country for no particular reason other than seemingly political spite. These are all very unflattering looks for a guy whose appeal is middle-aged women. It's not that's not okay with those voters. They don't like that. They like somebody who's nicer. This is one of the problems why a lot of Conservative leaders have trouble reaching those demographics. They come across as too caustic. Well, Trudeau is the most caustic person in federal Canadian politics right now, without a doubt. Just look at the numbers.
That's not true. That's not true.
Well,
Scott,
look at his positive and negatives.
I'm saying he's not the most caustic politician on the federal stage.
Well, by polling, he is.
Poilievre is and will be, but come on.
We saw the first, Scott. We saw the first glimpse of Trudeau's approach to Poilievre today when he spoke at the caucus meeting. What'd you think?
I just want to 1 second before I come to that. Because I do want to come to that. I just want to respond to something Kory said, because I think it's really important. I don't think that Trudeau's vulnerability with voters is because he says things that Conservatives don't like, which is how I sum up what you just said, in all honesty. And I know that you're going to go, fucking Liberal, you're being dismissive. But I think that's what that all amounts to. I think where his tone has lost the plot is that he has not been connected on the cost of living issue. He has not been connected in terms of responding to say, I know the government has to actually fulfill basic functions, with all that, and we're not doing this, and we're not.
I agree with all that too.
I think if he takes care of those things, that all this stuff about what he said about vaccine mandates, I think that's all overblown shit that Conservatives tell themselves.
It's not what he said about vaccine mandates. That is popular with 90% of the Canadian public. What's unpopular, and believe me, there are few people in well, I'm going to say there's only one other person who's seen as much polling on this stuff as me in the province of Ontario, and that's Nick Kubalis. There is a difference between people who agree on some of the vaccine mandate stuff and some of those things, and that's a very big number, and the people who disagree with the dividing and the secularization of the country around those issues. Those are very, very different numbers. And the people who fall off your wagon when you go really negative on that stuff aren't conservative voters. They're liberal voters. They're the softer voters in the center who don't like the divisive nastiness around that stuff. They find it off-putting. They think it's mean-spirited. They don't like it. And that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about that. I totally agree with you on the issue matrix. He's got to get back on the main topics that are of concern to people, and that's interest rates, that's inflation, that's issues related to that in the economic sphere. And their answers that they gave, through Dominic LeBlanc in response to Pierre's speech were once again childcare. Great, that's going to help you with 3% of the public, and then talking about how this is a problem other places in the world, right? And then Bitcoin. Like, this is very thin gruel if you're going to try to go into an election campaign with those issues. So I agree with you on all of that, but it's both. There is a tone thing too, and it's not about pissing off conservatives. They couldn't get any angrier. It's about going against your own brand in terms of the tone and the way you present yourself to the public. So
let me use that to bridge into Dave's responding to your question about what I think of Trudeau's first pass on the Poilievre thing. The first thing, as far as I'm concerned, it comes way too fucking late. As you know, I've been harping on this. We should have been handicapping this guy and pounding away on him and seeking to define and disrupt him months ago. But I have two specific things that that I'm critical of in terms of this as a first, and I know it's a first blush, but my two beefs with what I heard from Trudeau today, because I think it's an insufficient attack. And it's insufficient for two reasons. First, it's too general, right? He's reckless, he's irresponsible. I don't like that because it's so generalized. It may be true, and maybe people who vote Liberal and people who, like me, think Pierre Poilievre is fucking bad for politics and for Canada and for democracy. Maybe we nod our heads, but they're such vague and general assertions that they just come off as partisanship and they get dismissed by people. They don't land. They're too broad. If you're going to hammer somebody, you got to be specific. You say, Kory was a good guy until he grew that fucking beard. He looks stupid with that beard, right? I got to go right at him, right? So that's the first thing. It's not specific enough. It's not precise enough. You've got bullets. Don't throw pebbles, right, at this guy. Yeah. Second thing is, and this is it relates to Kory's point.
3 white goatees on this panel.
I know.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah, old man.
Let's grow them out and see who can make the best Santa. We'll do a Christmas special.
3 gray white guys. Welcome to Hee Haw season 24.
So, faithful listeners know I've spent a lot of time here in the past several weeks talking about this year's grain crop and the determination of our sponsor, CN, to get it to market safely and on time. To use President Biden's famous phrase, it's a big effing deal. Sorry, hurly-burlyites, we might enjoy cursing on this podcast, but our sponsors still insist on dignity and decorum. Anyway, there's nothing more important to the economy of Canada's heartland than grain, and our farmers depend on the railway to get it to their customers. Big responsibility. So it's with some pleasure that I can report here that 7 weeks into the season, grain movement is strong and smooth. And CN, which has already handled more than 1 million metric tons, is clearing orders on schedule, delivering grain to markets in North America and to seaports for shipment abroad. Actually, grain traffic was down slightly in August as Canadian agriculture shook off the lingering effects of last year's drought. But it's roaring back. Statistics Canada just released new estimates based on satellite imagery, and is now predicting the total crop this year will reach roughly 75 million tons. For the sake of comparison, last year's drought-stricken crop was 49 million, so things are well back to normal. As you can imagine, moving that much grain requires some pretty sophisticated planning. CN stays in close touch with shippers constantly sharpening forecasts, and has been working flat out, making sure its thousands of grain hopper cars are fully inspected and ready to take on the cargo load. Already this month, the expected ramp-up is happening. It will continue till spring. CN wants to be clear. Barring catastrophic weather events, which are out of everyone's control, the railway will move Canada's grain to market. If orders surge, so will CN. The crop is precious to so many people, from farmers to shippers to consumers around the world. There is no more important job.
In the wake of that general attack of irresponsible, reckless, it sounds high-handed. Like, it sounds like a lecture. It sounds like, oh, goodness me, he's not as good as we are and as I am. And they've got to get past that. Like, it's got to be more of, this is how this guy fucks you. Like, no one cares about whether it offends liberals' sense of values or liberals' sense of propriety. They care about whether or not Poilievre, represents something that is contrary to their interests. And you got to get to that. So this kind of high-handed of like, hey, you know what? We're in office. We know what's what. We know what's right. And so to me, it's got to get a lot better, a lot harder, a lot more specific, and a lot more rooted in the voter. And it's got to do that fast, because I still think that we've started late.
I'm not sure I would use them. Let me just say this. I'm not sure I would use them at all on this. I'm not sure I would use them at all on this. Right now, only 30% of Canadians think the country's headed in the right direction. In my experience, almost all of an incumbent government's potential votes come out of the pool of people that think the country's going in the right direction. Think the country's going in the wrong direction, you don't vote to re-elect the government. So they need to get that number, that right direction number, up to at least 40%. That's got to be his job. He can't carry the hard negative anyway. He shouldn't. No. He's the prime minister and the leader. They need fucking advertising. That's what they need. They need to be killing him on the airwaves.
But are we saying a version of the same thing? That the caustic negativity coming out of Trudeau's lips is off-putting to voters, and if you're delivering those kinds of messages, people don't like you, and you're not going to get your favorables up, going hammer and tongs on your opponent. Like it makes you unlikable. It can be essential at sometimes in a campaign to draw a contrast. But if you're trying to increase your likability and your right track, wrong direction, going hard negative with your leader as the spokesperson is like the worst thing I could ever imagine advising a candidate to do. Like it's just totally wrongheaded. But
I felt for months that he should have had a delegate take somebody who's going to be a ball of poison and just roll him down the road at Poilievre. But the government has such massive. I mean, there's a precondition to getting reelected that doesn't have to do with defining and destabilizing Poilievre, and that is to provide people with a base level of comfort. And right now, because of the competency issues that Poilievre wisely highlighted in sharp and caustic terms, and because of the cost of living challenge, like
caustic, word of the day on the curse of politics. Caustic.
But and obviously in the cost of living stuff, that's where Trudeau should be. Like, if I was going to put Trudeau on TV for 2 minutes, I would have him talking in a way that resonates with people about the anxieties that folks have around the economy. And now he was supposed to do that until the Queen died, notionally, right? I mean, we're going to come out of the cabinet.
What do you think about that package, Scott? What do you think about that GST rebate, something else package?
I don't know. I haven't heard it. I want to hear them articulate it. I want to see what the reaches of it. I don't know what the dental care plan is. You know my general view on it, David, to be honest with you, right? You know what I've said before, which is that I'm not persuaded that the response to the cost of living crisis is programmatic, right? I think it's relief. And I think it's showing people that you get it and you understand it and speaking to them in a way that actually persuades them that you get it. And B, I think it's relief measures. I don't think we've built a program that, by the way, once it's implemented and if it's executed successfully, neither of which you think is going to fucking happen, will eventually at some point benefit you and relieve this cost.
How about a little populism from the center too? Like why doesn't Champagne have the grocery retailers in and slap them around?
Yeah, that would probably be popular with some of their voters. But can we talk about the ideological problem this government has around these issues? Like, the very clear policy thing to do is to back off the carbon tax. It actually would lower prices on things that are affected and pushing inflation that are very top of mind to people. And a broad-based GST rebate, I think it's going to get panned by every economist in the country. Like, it's too broad. It's not focusing on the right things. And there's a reason he won't do it. It's because he has welded himself to a chair of the carbon tax Titanic. And I think, and you've talked about this before on the show, I think it's a fatally flawed argument when put under any amount of scrutiny. How is it that Biden can have a good carbon plan that is praised by economists and environmentalists and others that does not include a carbon tax, and yet the only way that we can do this in Canada is a carbon tax, although many other countries have done it without. And if you look even at the province of Ontario, I think we got 60% of the way to our carbon reductions with one measure alone, which was changing the electro arc furnaces for the steel mills at Dofasco and Stelco from coal-fired. One thing on the industrial side got us 60% of the way there. There are lots of ways for us to deal with climate change in the environment, using technology and other things. Other jurisdictions are doing them. The US is doing them. Biden's doing that. And we are just carbon tax, carbon tax, carbon tax. I think it's becoming a less and less and less credible argument. I think this, attempt to say that you don't care about climate change if you don't support a carbon tax is frankly fucking bullshit. It's always been bullshit, and it's increasingly obviously bullshit to any intelligent person who looks at the issue.
Well, Scott, that's really interesting because I don't know that I agree with that substantively, because the people I talk to mostly tell me that a carbon tax is a very useful way and an economically effective way at reducing emissions.
But is it the only way? Is it the only way?
But what I do think is that Biden gutted the Liberal defense on this with his package, and Poilievre indicated in his speech, I thought one of the most clear signals he sent was that this is on the ballot. I'm running against this thing, right? And I'm really going to, so I think everybody in the country has to face the prospect that real fundamental change in Canadian climate and energy policy is on the table.
I think it should be. I think it should be. And it doesn't mean that we're going to become this giant polluting, carbon emitting country. There's lots of evidence that we can do both these things at once and effectively. But I think it's pretty hard to sell that a carbon tax is about anything other than taxation. And you don't have to run on a carbon tax to win in Ontario and in the GTA, despite what other leaders and candidates on the right have thought from time to time. Ford has done it twice now. We had a cap and trade plan in 2018. Cap taxes, trade Kathleen Wynne. That was our environmental plan, and we put our focus on investments in EVs, changing from coal to electro arc furnaces for steel mills and other measures on the industrial side, and the emission reductions are real that were achieved through those things.
How many times have you pondered this question over your morning coffee or fancy matcha tea? Does Canada have enough shipping container capacity? Yeah, thought not. Well, I'm here to tell you the answer is an unequivocal no, we don't. And on behalf of our newest sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, why it's so important they build Roberts Bank Terminal 2. The Port of Vancouver is our country's largest port and already a vital hub, and it's only becoming more vital. Business and trade needs are growing in Canada. Marine container terminals link businesses, big and small, to the global economy. Just think about what's been happening these last couple of years with our supply chains. Connecting Canadians with the goods they need when they need them means scaling up before we run out of space, strengthening the connections between Canada and the rest of the world. Roberts Bank Terminal 2 will do that. And it's not just about delivering the much-needed container capacity. When it's all built, the economic impact will be 17,300 well-paying jobs and $3 billion in additional GDP annually. Which brings us to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. So why should they build it? Well, they've got a proven track record of building sustainable infrastructure projects and are a trusted partner to government, Indigenous groups, local communities, and Canadian businesses. I've thrown a lot at you here, and we'll talk more about this project in the coming weeks, including how it can help lower the cost of consumer products we all use. That's sort of important, eh? But for now, I just want to leave you with this thought. For all the reasons I just talked about, Roberts Bank Terminal 2 is the opportunity Canada needs.
I think it's. I think there's going to be a foot race on both the part of the Conservatives and the Liberals to walk the other team into a punch, to put them into a trap, in a wedge trap. And I think for the Conservatives, there's going to be an overt effort to walk the Liberals into a carbon tax trap on that wedge trap, and force the Liberals to argue that you don't care about climate unless you have a carbon tax. And I think that Biden, as we've all discussed, has robbed people of the ability to make that argument persuasively. So I think the Liberals are going to have to figure out, because he's not going to abandon the carbon tax. So you're going to have to figure out a way to navigate that. I think that the Liberals have to figure out what's the punch they're going to walk Poilievre into, and can they figure out how to get that done? And it isn't just this guy's too extreme, this guy's irresponsible, this guy's reckless. Those are just like broad assertions. It's going to have to be a policy thing. You can get him because of where he stands on issues, and he will not turn. Get him to dig in deep on something that's desperately unpopular with anybody that's not among his base voters. And
maybe he'll promise to fire 100,000 people. Do you think he might promise to fire 100,000 people?
But actually, I mean, it's something like that, right? Like you got to walk him into a punch, and I think there's opportunities there.
But I don't like. Look, I think you could walk him into a punch on carbon tax, but I'm not sure that's the one I'd walk him into.
No. I'm saying no. I think it's a trap for Liberals to.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a good idea for Liberals to try to make this the litmus test of the campaign, because if they do, they may not like the result.
I think they're walking into a punch on the criticism of the Bank of Canada. And I think that's a big punch to get walked into, because it's catering to the Globe and Mail editorial board and a handful of smarty pants folks who just are clutching their pearls at the fact that anyone would criticize the Bank of Canada, when I think there's lots of other people who think, you know what, the Bank of Canada is supposed to protect us against rising interest rates, and interest rates are going through the fucking roof.
Well, Kory, if what you're saying is
rising inflation, and so like I think that so what happens? The Liberals think we're attacking him for being reckless and a revolutionary, and what everyone else in the rest of the country hears is they're ignoring the problem, and he's saying something on the problem I'm worried about. And they're defending the status quo, and he is, and then overall in the campaign, you're talking about the economy writ large. So, like,
I want to talk about
every part of that is great for the Conservatives.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. That one of the things that annoys Liberals and certainly the establishment in the country about Poilievre the most is that he's a norm breaker, right? And he doesn't do things properly. He doesn't comport himself properly. He doesn't say things properly. And he's and the Bank of Canada is the primary example for people of that. And
chaps don't do it that way.
I think we should have learned from past elections that doesn't matter. I think fucking Ignatieff tried to run that election against Harper in 2011. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to people.
Rise up.
As much as you might want those things to matter to people, they don't matter to people. So you got to take the fight to Poilievre on real things that matter to people: economic policy, social policy, and that means cutting through his bullshit and exposing the Reagan agenda that's at the core of it, of complete deregulation of business and cutting the hell out of the size of government. And
tell people what it means when he says dollar for dollar. Like walk people through that and say, here's how, this is what the lunch bucket consequence is to that. And before he starts to try to spin that stuff out, define it and make him answer, well, how come you would do this? And how come you would do that? And why is it that, explain to me how this isn't the consequence of it. I mean, what he's talking about is a substantial shrinkage of government, and it's a substantial shrinkage, therefore, of helping people out. And I think you hammer them away on it. And you got
to get to the helping people out part if you want to have the argument make credibility, be credible. Because the government does a lot of things that nobody sees value to, and you have to tie it to value, right? Like so. When you see Liberals do this well, they're tying it to healthcare services. They're tying it to tangible things that people can relate to. If it's just an amorphous argument, it goes nowhere. So what is it being tied to? He is tying government incompetence to very tangible things, and you've got to tie government competence to equally tangible things and draw a differential. I think the challenge is that the public is largely focused on economic issues, which the Liberals always have sort of an issue disadvantage at. And how do you create a progressive argument and option to deal with rising inflation that doesn't involve dumping dump trucks full of money into the economy and making it worse? Like that's the challenge.
I'll take that fight because I'll take his instead of me explaining why spending more is the right policy. Piss on that. I'm going to say why cutting, which is what he's going to do, is going to harm people, and I'm going to go at that with a laser.
But he is spending more. Like the plan that they're coming out with is spending more. Who's the most vociferous critic of this in the United States and the media and sort of the establishment today? It's Larry Summers. It's Obama's economic advisor. Like it's.
I'm talking about Pierre Poilievre. I'm going to go with him.
But I'm saying there are a lot of people who are going to call bullshit on a inflation fighting plan that involves dump trucks full of money, whether it's GST rebates, whether it's,
But now you're arguing that we should be paying attention to the Bank of Canada set. So now you've turned it around.
Wait a second. What would you think? What would you think if the federal government did a driver's license rebate, Kory?
Well, I think it would be genius. But also, we weren't dealing with mass inflation at the time. But it's way better than a tax cut, And like we could have done a PSD cut, right? Like, and we looked at it, which is a version of what Trudeau's proposing, and it doesn't test as well. It's not viewed as being as meaningful. It's not viewed as being permanent because it's not permanent. So they would be better to try to slay the passport issue by saying no more passport fees, and get rid of that. Like do something to demonstrate some competence, and if you're going to give people money, do something like that.
I'm okay. I've said that like weeks ago. I said we should take a page out of your book in Ontario and say, where does the federal government create a direct cost levy on people and cut it and try to deal with that and all those things and make that tangible? I'm all for that. But beyond that, I want to come back to it. It seems to me that Pierre Poilievre has not defined what his economic arguments are in any way that's granular with people. And so before he does, I would use as much power as possible of incumbency and of advertising and to tell people that his plan is going to fuck you, right? And fuck you economically, fuck you financially, right? And
particularly invoke the CERB while it's still within people's memories.
And make him answer why that's not true, because then he's on his back foot rather than Trudeau being on his back foot about dump trucks full of cash. But there's another aspect to this that's vital, right? If Trudeau's vulnerability on making those arguments is that he's got to address the competency issue around passports and airports, well, then there's a mirror image of it, and that is whether or not Poilievre scans with people. Is he too harsh, too barbed wire, too caustic, as we've said here throughout the thing. And I think that you also want to spend some time highlighting to people that this guy is unlikable. Make him unlikable. Take all the things he says. Like he takes.
You better make your guy more likable if you're going to use that argument, because like this is a version.
I don't have to. I don't.
Well, one way or another, I think the debates in the House are going to be quite defining for both these guys. I think the head-to-head is going to be very important.
But then you're both assholes, and you're actually negating your ability to use the caustic argument. Like this is I think what really strategically blew up the Scheer campaign. If you're going to go on this guy is a fraud, he sold you a bill of goods, he's not who he said you're going to be, then you better know which country your passport's in, and you better actually have your insurance broker license if you put it on your resume, right? But if you're saying this guy is a fraud and a faker, and then you turn out to be a fraud and a faker too, and you bet the whole farm on that narrative in your advertising, well, you're kind of fucked, aren't you? Like you haven't created a, you're holding up a comparison, and it's like, I don't know, like, two dudes with a mustache, which one do I like more? I don't know. I don't like people with mustaches, right? Like it's just too similar to create some sort of, stark choice. So like if they're going to go on the Pierre's caustic, well, they better go back and find dust off the Sunny Ways playbook, because Trudeau is the biggest, most caustic asshole version of himself right now, and he needs to morph back into the nicer guy version if he wants to. Maybe have. Hey, that.
Kory,
maybe, but I don't want to let go of this point. Hang on, I don't want to let go of this point. Like Pierre Poilievre has already given his opponents a lot to work with when it comes to, hey, this guy can be a real fucking prick, eh? Like,
hey, Scott, can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
Can I stop you for a second? I'm standing outside the room where we're watching the results, overlooking the harbor in Charlottetown, smoking, as I do, and the group of elderly women walk down the boardwalk below me, and I say, "Hey, how come you're not watching the Conservative leadership race?" They go, "Oh, did they pick somebody?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Who is it?" I said, "Poilievre won." And the one old lady says, "Well, that's the end of the world." And then there's a long silence, and another old lady says, "Best keep walking the pier then."
I'm just, you know what? Like we know that the best advertising campaigns are to tell people what they think or are willing to think already. And I think that he has given people a lot of reasons to believe. Like, it's the flip side of the benefit that he gets from saying, I'll say shit that other people haven't, other politicians and leaders haven't. I'm going to say this about my opponents. I think you can also turn that around to say, this guy's unlikable. This guy is a bastard. And the connection with these other things are that when you're having contested assertions about whose economic plan will work and for whom will it work, well, once people think, well, but he's a bit of a prick, then they might be willing to say, and therefore maybe I do think that his plan will fuck me.
I think, Scott, that's in the hands of the gods, because I don't really think you can or should make that kind of attack. I don't think it works. I think people come to those conclusions about people themselves. As they came to that conclusion in Ontario about Tim, without us ever having said anything really negative about Tim as a person, right? Yeah. Some people, as you said, just don't scan. Other people do. It's not fair often. It doesn't have much to do with who they are often.
You can be quite mean to some people. Like if you look at our treatment of Dion versus Ignatieff, like Dion, he was like a wounded puppy dog, maybe, suffering, from some sort of, rash where its fur was falling out or something, like something really unappealing, but unappealing and still, you want to pick it up and hug it and take it to a shelter or something. Like there's something sympathetic in its patheticness, right? And so you could only take attacks to like call it a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 before people started just saying, "Oh, you guys are just being mean," right? Sure. Now, Michael Ignatieff, you could go to 12. Like there is nothing that you couldn't say about that guy that's personal and mean-spirited. We basically, called him a fucking traitor. And everyone's like, well, it's, but, probably even more so. Right. Like it's, and thankfully, it turns out we weren't just being mean. We said he was just visiting, and he was, if he didn't win, he was going to go to the U.S. And 6 months later, he's back at Harvard. So,
I don't know.
Turns out it was all true.
It didn't take
So
6 months.
I don't think it took 6 months.
Campaign staff the next day.
My point being, how personal and how mean you can be to an opponent is limited by who that person is and perceptions about them. And
I think Poilievre opens the door to a pretty nasty attack. If Ignacio was a 12, I think you can go 14 on Poilievre.
Probably, and I think with Trudeau, that number that you can go to is a lot higher now than it was when he came into office.
Well, we're talking about very distinct audiences in both cases, right?
Yeah.
But Kory, I'm fascinated through this whole conversation because you came on the hurly-burly after the Ontario election. And I can't help but feel that you have been much more impressed by the Poilievre campaign in the last couple of months than you were in the early going, in terms of its messaging, in terms of its content, messaging, and positioning. Because you were at that point saying, Christ, if I was the Liberals, I'd go right after the convention and crush them.
Yeah, I think so. But what's changed? I think there's a few things that have changed. I think inflation has not subsided as quickly as economists said it would. At that time, we were getting briefings from the finance ministry in Ontario that were predicting that basically by the new year that all of this stuff would be a distant memory, and that we would be half of the distance to where we are on these things. So I think you were seeing that from bank economists and others as well. What we've seen is that those issues have gotten substantially worse than people were predicting at the time. And so I think that's one part of it. I think the overall economic environment has changed. I think the second thing that has changed, tracking the first, is the level of anxiety has pushed those issues that were kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of voter issue matrix to the very top. And so that's changed a lot. And the third thing is you've seen the right track, wrong direction, general satisfaction with the government go into free fall. So, what's a sign that somebody's on the right track message wise? Those are things. But, I don't think this is a wave started by the Poilievre campaign. I think this is a wave that they're surfing on quite effectively. They didn't create the wave, but man, are they surfing it like a professional. It's a really great environment for them to be in, and I think that's why they're in such good standing. That, and obviously, message discipline that is really as good as I've ever seen.
Scott, do you got any last words on this before we move to our Hey Yous? Got some last thoughts you want to impart after the?
Not really. Go hard.
All right.
Liberals have to do two
First
things.
Of all,
they got to fix their shit, and they got to attack him.
I want to apologize to all the Clippings fans out there. We didn't have a clipping today. There's normally a clipping segment of this show, and I have failed to deliver a clipping. So I apologize to the fans of Clippings. But Gordon Pinsent is here to ring in the Hey Yous for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, Kory, you got one for us?
Oh, I've got the best Hey You for the hurly burly. Oh, and we didn't plug the shirt here. I'm wearing.
Look at that. Kory's wearing the merch.
Beautiful.
So people ask me all the time, how much do you get paid to go on the hurly burly or Curse of Politics? And I just show them a picture of this shirt and say, it's things that money can't buy. Although maybe money can buy this. Do you have a website? My Hey You is going to my longtime friend and your friend too, Jenny Byrne. I've rarely seen somebody. Actually, not rarely. I've never seen somebody run a more effective leadership campaign with phenomenal message discipline, with a GOTV effort that is second to any I've seen, with the highest number of memberships ever sold in a conservative leadership race ever by miles and miles and miles. You can go through basically every metric of the thing, and it's like I don't know, it's like being Wayne Gretzky and the Oilers in the '80s or something. You're just racking up records that I don't think are going to be broken anytime soon. So for all the Curse of Politics fans and all the Jenny fans out there, I'll put myself at the top of that list. So hey, Jenny, did a great job.
Hey, fucking you, Jenny Byrne.
Hey, you.
Unreal. Scott, what's yours?
I would echo that. I'm going to have a complete change of pace. Marginally, I'm sticking with Jenny because our friend is also a Habs fan. So I want to say to the Montreal Canadiens, you've got me in a pre-season state of excitement. I like a lot of the moves. I'm hopeful. But this New Jersey thing and putting logos on it, this RBC joke, like, stop it, okay? Stop it. It's no good. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see a logo on an NHL jersey. I really don't want to see a logo.
What is this, fucking soccer?
Jersey. What
is it, soccer?
It is not soccer, and I don't want it. So my hey you is to the Montreal Canadiens and the NHL. Tear these fucking advertisements off their jerseys and let's stick to hockey.
Yeah. Excellent. I agree with both of those hey you so much. And my hey you goes out to the Prime Minister because I know he listens to the pod because he's quite keen on advice from me and Scott. So, Prime Minister, I've said this to you before, and now I sound like Pierre Poilievre over breakfast. But in any event, the government desperately needs a finance minister. And I think the absence of that role throughout this economic period is hurting the government really, really badly. And I really think you need to consider splitting up the deputy prime minister and the finance job, giving finance to somebody like Francois-Philippe Champagne, who might bring some energy to that, some communications chops. And maybe, by the way, you'd find out if he was a potential replacement, if he's got the chops for that. But in any event, Ms. Freeland seems overmatched by the circumstances at the moment, and it's a real gaping hole for the government. That's my hey you. All right. I would like to thank Kory for coming on right after the convention to walk us through everything that happened. Scott, by God, you're a trooper to bring your Michelob Ultra to this. Talk about bringing a knife to a gunfight, Michelob Ultra. And to our sponsors, TELUS, CN, and our new sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Thank you for your support of this podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening or watching. We'll see you next week with more Curse of Politics.